All right, well, everybody, welcome. This is really for the internet people. We've already been hanging out a little bit and talking flows and Salesforce in the room. We are the fourth Wednesday of every month at UTD. We are joined today by the representation from the UTD Student Salesforce User Group. So we'll be doing a quick talk on flows and pro flowing, and then kind of opening it up for discussion with everybody about jobs in the student group and trying to see what we can do to engage. So go ahead. This is me. I am Paul McCollum. Moyez Thanawala. I was hoping Sarah said she was going to be online, so she may be popping in late. So she was going to try and join virtually. Feel free to grab and connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm not doing great on my social channels lately. My client is very busy. So I'm behind on my Slack and LinkedIn communication a little bit. Moyez founded the group probably 12 years ago, I think now. So I've been running it for the past 3, but Moyez is here and always supportive and a great person to know in the community. He's an MVP, Hall of Famer. So he's been an MVP for more, I think 7 years now running. So very well respected. He's met Mark Benioff, so he's a good person to talk to in the space if you need any guidance. And you can talk to me. Hey, Lawrence, what?
He also teaches at UTD.
He also teaches at UTD. Professor
Yeah, he teaches at UTD. And he's actually had me as a guest lecturer once, so. Have you had your final with him? Is he difficult? Was it a hard final?
Oh, we had the option of taking the Salesforce certification.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we went for that.
Okay, great. Did you get your certification?
Yeah.
Outstanding. Congratulations. Are you in the same group? I don't recognize your faces, so I don't.
Yeah, actually, this is the first session. So I work for Accenture.
For Accenture?
Yeah, Salesforce technology.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Okay.
So like 2.5 years in Salesforce.
You have what?
2.5 years of experience in Salesforce. Yeah.
And you work for Accenture?
Yes, but right now I'm a graduate student JSON.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was about to take this course this time, so it's already in waiting list. So I'm waiting. So it's very hard to get enrollment this course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Already got another day.
Class getting out. Yeah, no, he's a great guy. He's been a fantastic mentor, and since I got into Salesforce, he's helped me a ton. So I owe him a lot of what I have done or been able to accomplish. His daughter was supposed to be dropping in to talk a little bit about the stand-up that's coming up. So we'll see if she gets here in time to do that. So I am always looking for people to help bring different ideas for what we can discuss and talk here. So it's really pretty casual on LinkedIn. If you've got an idea for a session, something that you think we should present, I'd love to have you listed as a participant and regular community member for these particular topics. So let me know if you're interested. We can do that. Jade, I was hoping Jade would be here. She's does a lot with military outreach, and it's another thing that I'd like us to get into more. So Pooja, I will learn your last name and make sure that I get you there. Yeah. Pooja is the leader of the Salesforce student group here. So thank you again for coming.
As the students, what would you like to see from professionals in this space?
If you learned something or saw a speaker, went to a group and said, hey, this would be really interesting, it's right up the alley of what you talk to here. You know, developer goes from, you know, flow to formulas to Apex to Angular, React. There's React and Angular components in Salesforce. So anything that crosses over with Salesforce and development topics, it'd be good to be aware and add to your arsenal. The more you know is going on in Salesforce, the better you build things, the better you create things, and the more job opportunities are there.
One of the cool things
Yeah.
that I saw at Dreamforce was using VS Code to open flows behind the scenes, and you could edit your flows from VS Code.
Uh-huh.
That was interesting.
Yeah, so flows actually get expressed as XML code when they're moved from environment to environment. Now, I haven't gotten to where I've tried to build a code with VS Code because that would be stupid. The
Agreed.
point would be to, yeah, one of my first jokes that I told at this user group when the CLI was first coming out, and everybody was excited that there was a command line interface for this graphical tool because it would let developers do, more developer stuff and script things. And to me, CLIs always come first, and it's weird that they come second. I was like, I hope somebody builds a UI for the CLI, which is hilarious because the UI is already there. And you wouldn't, the UI, anyway, it was hilarious to a couple of people that were in the room, which made me feel at home, which was nice. Very, very nerdy joke. But yeah, no, anyway, flows, design visually, display visually, and that's one of the things we'll talk about. Feel free to tweet or follow along. I don't have one of my funny tweets for this. Again, I don't like promoting my own sessions. I'd much rather promote, having other people there, but hopefully this will be worth everybody's time. Speaking of self-promotion, my book is now delivering. I pre-ordered my own book off of Amazon and it showed up, so it's officially a real book. If you're interested in checking it out, now you got the copy. Have you had a chance to look at it all yet?
Just the start part of it, but
No.
yeah.
Okay. Good. Yeah, let me know. This would be this QR code over here. This is my favorite link, especially all through COVID. And I would encourage you as salesman people here, we can get this out of the way so you can find the right here. I'll just cover that up. That should make it easier for your QR codes to scan the right one. That is the link to the Trailblazer community events page. This group is listed there, and you'll see my meetings on today. You'll see every other user group nationwide, at least, represented on there. So if you have 2 hours and you want to learn something, this group is on the 4th Wednesday. If that's not when you have time, go look there and find something that's going on during the time you have and go interact, and that's a good place to make connections so you can do it kind of on your schedule. And so I found some fantastic stuff. You never know when something you're interested in is going on in a suburb of Ohio at their user group. And if they still do virtual, if they do hybrid, then you can go attend that and see it. So one of the reasons I stay hybrid is to make that an opportunity for everybody. So that you don't have to live in Dallas, but if this is something you wanted to hear and you happen to have this time free, great. Now, would I rather have you here in person? Yes, but register, come, and we'll keep doing it. I think the virtual part is the hardest part of this job at this point, besides wrangling speakers, clearly.
And if you've got as a student, if you go to these, it's a great thing because most of these meetings start in the beginning of who's hiring, who's looking, and you pair up. And then it's a great way to find opportunities. Yep, and you're welcome to do that in the chat. Everybody exchange LinkedIn details. If you're looking for somebody, please pipe up. I've tried to make this much more content-based to try and get here and not focus on hiring jobs because I want people engaged in the content. Those are the people that will have jobs. So the more content seekers, hopefully the more professionals that we have to share and seek talents with. But anyway, those are my 2 super secret hacks for finding stuff in the Salesforce environment. I learn better like this. When I can ask somebody a question directly, I can get the right answer. I don't have to scroll, read through a bunch of things and somebody else's paradigm. I can ask a couple of times. So I'll go through this quick. You guys know I'm putting on a conference with some friends of mine in the Microsoft Cloud and the AWS space. We'll be in Irving, April of next year.
please tell, I'm gonna try and talk to UTD and see if we can get a UTD sponsored booth and add some extra people there, maybe do a competition like we did with the case study last year. So we'll see if we can get some free passes and stuff.
Are the dates on there?
What's that?
I don't see the dates on there. It said it's April.
April 2024. Yeah, it's the 9th through 11th. You're right. I should have that on there.
9th to 11th. Okay.
And we haven't had Moyes show up. So no Moyes minute. Oh, sorry. I keep scanning. Sometimes people disconnect and they lose their ability to talk. So feel free to pop up on the chat. Lawrence, if you're watching the chat, I'd appreciate that. And let us know if anybody's got any good questions. All right, we'll start in on the flow topic if that's okay. I took several minutes on that graphic, so please appreciate it. All right, so one of the things we're going to talk about, and one of the reasons I wanted to bring up and have this session is, so flows, like you said, flows are a tool for admins, is a common misconception. They're not, they're extremely powerful. There are some limits, but they force you to think in another way. So it's more like flows are not a tool for developers that are used to developing in the platform that they develop in. People that are just learn really fast in flows. So Apex takes a lot longer. There's more nuance to it. And the old set in your ways developer that only want to do Apex, they have a lot of tried and true habits that make for good DevOps and dev and builder practices that flows should learn from, so that when we start doing flows and we expect our flows to be taken seriously as developers that we are, flow is just another development language. It's a different tool with a different UI. It's still, you still have to think in steps and processes and logic. So there's a handful of other things that aren't as easy to do in flows that make code seem more mature. And that's one of the, this is a list of my favorite things that would make flows more professional. So if you learn how to do them, I like to argue with people. They say this can only be done in Apex. Give me the problem. Tell me what it is. I can do it in flows. Like I said, if it's not in memory management to where it would overload the heap size that flow gets versus Apex's heap size, that's the only reason that I can't do something in flows. And I don't find a lot of those. But everything else, going through DevOps, error correction, error handling, try-catch blocks, stuff like that. A lot of that exists in flows, but if you're not a developer, you don't look for how that's done. One of the women that I learned a lot about flow from didn't know what bulkification was. And bulkification is one of the first things you learn in Apex as a means to streamline database interactions. So we'll talk about bulkification down there, but she was a really good flow developer, but didn't know the bulkification pattern. And when I was trying to explain it, hey, this took me a little bit longer than you thought it would for me to build this for you because I bulkified it. And she said, what's that? I didn't know you have to do that in flows. And you don't have to, but you should. And if you can make that explanation, if you can make that leap, here's my code that's just as robust and follows all of the developer patterns, then that will give us some equality in that building. And so flow is something that's still fairly new and it's changing a lot. Apex, not so much. It's kind of like Java. You either learn to beat out somebody who's had 8 years of Java and Apex development, or with the new version of flows, you have much more even standing from a technology that's new and growing and changing a lot. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I cheated. Clearly, I would open JavaScript is my native tongue. I open a Visual Force page, and then I just said, go get my JavaScript file that I put in the static resources. I didn't learn much Visual Force programming at all. I just figured out a way to shoehorn what I was good at into a Salesforce page. I did a whole VR POC where I was able to pull something in into full 3D with JavaScript, barely using the Salesforce. Hey, Salesforce group. The sign's pretty big, but. Okay, so the first and best thing, in my opinion, where flows wins out over code is if you want code to understand code, you have to learn how to read code. And half the time, what I do when I go in and I'm troubleshooting, I'm finding a problem in code, is I start diagramming what the code does. It goes here, it checks this, it goes here, it checks that, because I've got to explain it back to a business person that can say, no, you're not supposed to go from this concept to that concept, you're supposed to go over here. And once you have that diagram, they understand that you can solve the problem. Flows, you start with the diagram. So lean into that. It is a self-documenting tool, basically. You comment things, those connectors show you exactly what is happening. So make sure you plan your flows to have a visual display of what's going on. Make the logic, what you're trying to solve, be what the flow shows. You know, the purpose of a car is to get somewhere. So your flow should be trying to get somebody or something from point A to point B. If you have a lot of weird branches in your flow and they go out left, right, I still use the auto, I don't use auto layout very much. I like to craft my flows visually. The layout on the page is just as important to me as what it does. So if I do 900 steps, but they're all the same kind of basic function, I'll drag them close together and make them to where you almost don't see them on the page. I will use that visual layout to help explain what the flow is trying to do. So I had a lot of weird logic and grading the results of a form. And it was a lot of calculations and a lot of this and that. It wasn't heavy in memory calculation, but it was just a test and a set and a test and a set. But it didn't really explain what the thing was going on. So I basically piled those things up on each other. If I needed to edit it, I would spread them back out again. But everybody that came and looked at it just saw that blob of things. They saw what everything was up to and what was doing up to that point, and they could understand that. You could look at it quickly and say, okay, the user's getting from here to buying a car. Okay, here are the steps. If there's a bunch of weird details in math, collapse those and keep them someplace in. If it's an important branch, if the user picks A or the user picks B, they go down two totally different paths. That's something you should represent in the logic and the flow on the display. Descriptive components. So my dumb example right here is this get records gets data 1. People will very quickly just say, I need to get records, and they'll go on and start coding it. Make the labels descriptive, get user's default product, and then in parentheses 1. If I'm only getting 1 record, that's a different kind of query. And if I can read that I don't have to click in and see how many records you're getting or what criteria you're using, and that tells me I'm getting 1 record that's its user's default product. I don't have to look into that. I read that, I know what it does. I'm not debugging that element. The other thing I haven't even seen, I actually haven't even tried to do error paths. So every time you create a get record connection, you drag and you connect it to the next step in the process. Once you connect it to the next step in the process, there's another dot there for you to grab that. And if that query fails, you have an error path that you can create. I always, at the very beginning of my flows, if I'm going to do any queries, I create an error screen. And my error screen says, there's been an error, sorry about that. And then it displays the fault message that happened in the flow, which gives a user and a debugger something that they can track. If you don't, then it just gives the system error message. So every time there's an opportunity for something to fail, connect that to a failure screen and display that message. And then if you're really cool, log that a user got that message. But you can just use one screen that just has the generic flow error message, and you can reuse that for every single query operator, anything that could fail, like an Apex call or something like that. But set that up. I don't see very many of them. And the line that connects the elements is a red dotted line. So I usually just drag that into the middle of my process and connect everything to it, and everything goes past it. It can get a little noisy. Sometimes I'll delete that until I'm done, because it can make the design of the flow kind of hard to read. But it's important. Error handling is something that Apex developers do. They do a try-catch block. This is the same thing as a try-catch block. You're catching the exception. The exception, you're sending that to a screen and or logging it. So you can have it just write the error. You can have it display the error. You can have it log and display the error. But having an error handling concept in your flows makes that as mature. That adds that developer kind of maturity to the flow. Naming patterns. So when you're naming variables, when you write in code, there's almost always a structure for naming variables. You can see in this one, this is basically a method name. This is a descriptive label, and it's just text, because you can get away with it. For Salesforce, when you're creating variables, you also have to give things an API name, which is kind of the behind the scenes, has all the underscores and the underscore C. You take advantage of that. Make sure that if you can't read this, this is going to turn it into get users default. Sometimes you don't get to pick what the name, you just give it an API name. So if you use that, I use these, and when I start writing flows, even if I'm just doing one thing to test it, I drive people crazy, because I will take a lot of time figuring out how many screens I'm going to go through. And every time I create an element that is a screen element, I name the variable. I give it a clear English name, plain text name, and then I put screen underscore 0 underscore 1 or 2 or 4, so that whenever I'm debugging, this tells me what screen I was on, or where that variable was, or where I picked it up. And if you are coming in and looking at this code after me, and the user is getting a problem where screen 0 underscore name is not found, or is null, or has an extra character in it, or something that causes the program to break, if it's a 30 screen flow, and you've just got name as your variable name, you're having to click through every single element. Now, the Flow Builder tool gives you a way where you can go look at name, and it'll show you all the places that it's used. But this will jump you ahead of that. If you have a good naming structure, have that really well laid out, when you see debug or when you get that email, flows when they error will a lot of times send an email with the flow error information to the person who created it. In production environments, you don't always get that. So sometimes you just get a copy paste, you get a screenshot. If you've named your variables well, you get a good idea of where they came from. The rest of it has to do with, and I'm pointing, hopefully you guys can still see me on the video. So var is what I always put in front of a single variable, not a collection, a list. If I create a new variable to hold any data, if it's just got one, if it's not multiple together in an array, when I solve problems with code and with flows, I'm either looking for an entire collection of things, a whole array to loop over, or I'm looking for a single element. In my head, that's where I go to. If I'm looking for, in some of these screens, you don't get the entire, kind of the names will scroll off the edge and you can only see the first part of it. But if I know that I'm going to look for collection variables, if I'm looking for an array of the results from something that I've stored or created, my head first goes to, is it just a single item or is it an array? You might have other things that work for you, but so I do that for collection variable and then a form, which is a formula variable. Formula variables, I know I'm computing from some other variable. If I'm debugging something, I don't go look necessarily at the form variable. I know that I'm going to go have to look at something else. And I use a lot of formula variables whenever I build flows. So put those in there, but I know that they're mutable and that it's probably related to something else, and then I can skip, but it's usually result that I'm wanting to get into. I call things loop when you're creating loops. If you had a problem at this area, a loop is when you know when you're going into the loop and you're able to see it. So loop variables I use a lot. If I'm using something only within a loop. So when you're looping over result sets, you're taking data from a query and doing something with each element in that data. If I'm storing the results after I've changed somebody's name or I've hyphenated or calculated it, I throw that data into a loop variable, or I use it in the middle of it, but I know that that variable is kind of specific to that loop, and I really probably shouldn't be using it afterwards unless it's a collection I want to use. So those are temporary variables. If you don't use this structure and you're trying to code flows quickly, you can always find this stuff, but it's 5 clicks to go find out what the variable was before. If you have these hints on there and you just use this here for the Salesforce user group. Oh, no problem. No, go, yeah, sure. If you've forgotten it, somebody else, you're new to it, this saves you all of those extra steps. Had to be dead in the middle of the. That's my kind of luck. I'm glad you found it.
That's good luck. You found it.
Yep, good news. Get and find and set are also good verbs to use as if you're doing something. Getter and setter is a common pattern in development languages. So using those keywords, a lot of time there's a lot of Apex developers trying to learn flows. So if you speak in their language, they will be quicker to accept your pattern and your style. So if you're going out to get records, naming a get query something that's get and just having that description in there, but lean into those, say, the reusable verbs to help explain what you're doing. So you're coming up with a vocabulary to use, a shorthand. Great example. The plus symbol. We know what the plus symbol does. If I say plus, or if I call something that says add 1 or +1, if I use 15 different terms for the same thing, it gets confusing. The more you hone in a simple language, especially keeping it consistent throughout your flow, the easier your flow is to reverse engineer. So it's not just building flows that work well for you, it's building flows in a pattern that anybody can come in and understand intuitively. So you're trying to build a good user experience for your code. Good code writers comment everything. If people don't comment their code, if you've looked at code that's not commented, sucks. So this is how you can comment your flows. It doesn't support the same kind of commenting where you can do it in line and wherever you want, but this is a way to comment your flows. You can write something in the description. Yes. Once you double click into that step to see the step and then go and edit. Sometimes you can't see it by default. You have to go into the rename and then it shows you the description. And so it's different step by step. I'm hoping they put in a note element at some point that you can just drop, okay, and this part of the flow is going to do X, Y, Z.
If you have a description of that,
Maybe. Yeah, it changes. They could have already built the thing I'm talking about and released it yesterday. That's growing so much. So yeah, something else already works and does the same thing. Do that. So I already went over visual grouping. So if you're doing components, if everything's doing the same way, drag them together. I would say if your flow has more than 10 steps in it, turn off auto layout, because auto layout is just going to go off the edge of the screen and you can't push things very close together and kind of organize them. So once you get up to bigger flows, I would turn off auto layout just so you can read that stuff, what you're writing better.
What do you think about creating subflows for larger ones so that way you can say this is just branching out to a subflow?
Yep, no, that's next in the list there, Lawrence. Subflows are also really good for debug. So one of the debugging problems, if you have a record triggered flow, you can't do debug. If you have event triggered flow, you can't run those through debug. It won't let you create a record to trigger the flow and then show you what it's doing. It's just not able to. But what you can do is create a record triggered flow that calls an auto launched flow and have that do all the work. That's what we do with the event trigger. We have an event start a flow and we let the flow do the work. And this was my buddy Rodrigo has a genius addition to the column pattern. That let me do debug. So the event triggered the start of the flow. The start of the flow went to a subflow. The subflow, you can say, pretend a record came in here. And then you can work through that and all the debug, regular debug works. So scheduled flows, event triggered flows, and record trigger flows, subflows helped you do debugging. Now, it may have changed, Lawrence, for subflows and pause elements. Subflows, I believe, trigger a bit of a pause. So, or basically a save state of the calling flow. So when you call a subflow, I believe, now this could be wrong, we'll validate this later, it definitely happens on pause. I think it saves the memory. So if you have, it tries to save it and write it kind of to the heap and calls another flow. And both of those flows together, memory has to be less than the maximum for one flow run. So you can start testing subflows. And then when you call it, you're not actually debugging, you're debugging your flow, but when the users actually run it, you may get different results and different performance. So if you call a subflow that calls a subflow, calls a subflow, you can have some memory management stuff. So be aware if you get to where you're using that kind of complexity, but subflows and reusable components are a really good idea. Another developer pattern is to break your flows. If they get too complex, break them into pieces and build subflows. This is probably the most hot take that I have. When you're building a flow, and I didn't get time to do an example, I was going to try and do it live, but we're going to go a little quicker. A lot of people use flows because they're easy. And the easiest way to do a decision is to create a decision block. Create a decision block and it says, okay, in this case, the next step is this. In this case, the next step is this. In all the other cases, that's the default case and that goes over here. And you drag those 3 steps out to 3 different branches of the logic. Now, we want to represent our logic with our branches, not simple decisions. So instead of using an assignment or a branch and assignment step, if I'm saying, okay, if the person is tall, then they should have an extra seat, and they should have more seat room. If they're short, then they should have this seat room. If they're have something else, then they should have this seat room. That's not 3 different branches. That's a minor variation in the data you're about to save. So when I do an update, instead of having those 3 branches and have them set the variables for what seat size they need, because that seat size choice isn't important to the flow. It's just get the data, insert the record. I will create a formula that has an if statement in it that says, if height equals this, then seat size equals that. Else, if height equals this, then seat size. And you make that a little piece of code, but no branches, no extra trees. My code, when I insert this here, has some formulas that do that, lazy if statements, those tiny, if this, then that. Instead of having 5 different elements on the page, you look at this and you see, oh, it's these 3 formulas for these 3 fields. You don't have to click on each of those individual elements, debug each of those, see what they're all doing. You go straight to the insert statement and you see that pattern is saying, okay, for seat assignment, it's using a formula. And I go look at the formula and I see all the logic in one place. So instead of looking at 4 elements, I can look at 2 elements and debug it. Formulas is more code. It can take a little bit longer to write that, but a lot less long for somebody to come in and say, oh, this is just a 3-step flow, as opposed to a 90-step flow, because it's a lot of branches just on trying to assign variables. So that's a hot take. That's a pattern that I use to keep my flows from looking hard to understand, but it makes working with them a little bit harder to do. You have to understand how to do logic to do that way. That's not just drag and drop. So when they get big, this is what I do to manage that. I see a lot of repetitive assignment steps. People will have 3, 4, 5, 6, assign this value to this variable, and another element to assign this value to that variable. And there's another step. Look for places where you can group them into and just say, assign this value to this variable, this value to this variable, this value to this variable in one assignment step. Figure out where you can reduce steps to keep your flow looking sharp and easy to understand. Labels, settings, and CMDT. This one has saved me a lot of time, and I did not expect this to. When you're doing DevOps, and if you're working in a highly regulated industry, financial services, it can be a big deal to change code. You have to push this through multiple states. It has to start out in dev, it has to go to merge, there's a lot of work done to being able to alter code. When you want to change something small, it is a huge pain to go through and make that change to your code. So if I want to say, allow a user to have 5 choices or allow the user to have 4 choices, if that's something I think is going to happen, I will create a system variable, which is just an entry. A label is another system variable, or CMDT is a place where you can go get it. It is usually a lot easier and faster to build your flow to talk to these user setting areas and make those changes to the user setting. Maximum number of loops is a big one that I go through. If the data gets too big, then I can just say, can you please go change this label from 5 to 4? And that can be done quicker as opposed to me going in, editing the flow, checking in the flow, checking it out, having somebody test it. If you parameterize your flows using these external tools, you can save yourself a lot of time. Now, I still have to go through a lot of process to update a label or CMDT, but it's a lot less, and nobody has to go debug my code to find out where I've said, set the maximum number of loops to this variable that's stored outside of it. So an admin can go in and alter how my flow works without having to understand the code and touch my flow. Now you want them to touch it, you want to call that out. I haven't found a good place to do that, except for like an initialization block. So I'm toying with the concept of always have an initialization block, which is a pretty common developer tool. I think I just skipped over that in this, initialize section. So anytime I'm going to get labels from outside the system, anytime I'm getting user data, because you'll want to say, okay, what is the current user who's using this flow? What's their department? Now, I may not need that until my 13th step, but if I put it all up in here to where somebody can see in one place, what's all the data this flow is going to need to use? If you can put it up there and combine it into one step, that makes your code, that makes your flow a lot easier to read. Java developers do an initialization, the constructor. There's a lot of stuff that happens here. Not quite the same, but again, it's reusing some of those patterns of here's the startup parameters, and now I'm doing all of the work. That's another new one. That's a Paul custom plan. It may be a terrible idea, but I'm starting to use it. Process progress logging. This is what Lawrence and I are going to present on at Dreamforce this year. When people are stepping through flows, when you're writing code, there's a lot of tools to write debug error logs. There's alerts, there's that you can put in JavaScript, there's alerts you can put on the screen, or there's alerts that you can write to the code when you're doing errors. You write to logs, do a lot of production, figures out if the production support team figures out, hey, there's these 30 errors that were generated from production today, please go fix them. And they send those off, and those become bugs or tickets and priorities of development teams. Flows, you can do that. Most flow developers don't. So figure out what a good error logging is. And we already talked about being able to drag an error log to a screen. but put those on there. Now, the pattern that I'm talking about here with this people, for the process progress logging, is something Apex developers don't do yet. So this is another kind of pet project. I'm still getting the temperature. As your users, as whatever part of the process you're working on, it's a business process. There should be a name for that business process. It may just be request HR help, request a new life insurance policy, change of beneficiary. That process has steps. Your flow starts or finishes. It doesn't necessarily get halfway done. You end up being responsible for writing. If people stop using your flow, or if they're only able to get to step 2, log each step that they get into. If they abandon your flow on step 3 every time you're using it, then you've got a problem with step 4. And you know where to go look. And instead of only logging the errors, which only happen if you get an error, but it doesn't happen if users quit. If somebody gets frustrated because they're not seeing choices and they just close the window, there's no error. And that's an awful experience for users. So this PPL process, I think everyone who writes any code that tries to perform a process should index or log how far you get in that process. I think we should model that when we're designing solutions. How will I know how far people get in this process? If it's a one-page screen, they click it or they don't. If they're not filling it out, you'll know that they're not filling it out. But would you know if they opened the flow and didn't finish it? And so, hey, they came to this page, they never hit submit. What happened? Validation rule kept them from being able to submit. If I've got a bunch of log messages that said users are getting to step 1 out of step 2, I know I've got a problem with getting to step 2 and I go troubleshoot that. But if it doesn't generate an error, a lot of times it doesn't make it up to the users. And if I'm building something, if my time is being spent on it, it's important that users be able to use it. And the fact that we don't natively track that, I think, is a miss in Agile. And that's what I want to pitch with that PPL. So that's just another hot take.
Paul? Yeah, the question that I have is about retention policy. How long would you find it necessary to keep a log? 30 days? Anything more?
I usually like to go month to month, so at least 60 to 90 days.
Okay.
If I'm doing a release every week, at least to cover a sprint. So however long your sprint is times 2. So that your last sprint, before you get to the next sprint, you have feedback on how successful your code actually was. I only get feedback at a lot of my clients when something breaks, if it doesn't deploy. I don't get feedback that it worked so-so, or people didn't like it very much. I design stuff to where it's fast and easy to use. Usually I'm improving something and I may rearrange things to make it faster, but there's no error log for things being faster. Now, if I track how long it takes somebody to get all the way through steps and it's 20% faster than last month, that's my win. And making stuff easier to use should be everybody's goal and baked into every development problem, not just stuff that's trying to sell you things. That's where we usually look at success metrics and exit points. But it's not hard to write a logging tool that in between every step, every screen, you say, okay, user got past that second screen. They're still here. They're still here. And when they quit, you don't have anything to write because they closed the window. But you know that user at this time, on this date, with this version of the flow, they only got halfway through it. That's a real quick update, create new record in database, update the record that I created for this user's session. I create a session, and through that whole instance of the flow, I'm tracking the same progress. If they come back 14 times, I'll have 14 records. So
this is just a custom object.
Yeah.
All logging and just.
Apex log, I think, is actually just a custom object, and you can write to it as just an insert statement inside of Salesforce.
Yeah, because I did something similar after the flow wizards, where it's a really cool idea where if you do a flow that's saving like a user 12 minutes on average, you log that whenever they run it. So that at the end of the month, you know, I saved this guy 4 hours.
Oh, they did the same?
Uh,
They did that at Flow Wizards or?
They sent me, somebody, Anna, I think, wrote an article that's in some webpage that pointed me to that, and I went in.
Oh, okay.
I haven't done the training of just practice. How many flows are running each time. I'm using it more like dashboard, you know, if it's running good, and if it's not running. But I can plug in a bit. This flow is saving 12 minutes on average every time it runs.
That was your idea to track the time or it was something that? Here's, okay, because I brought this up. I've been talking about this in a couple different groups for a month now. So it'd be funny if we came up with the same idea at the same time.
I brought it up. Doesn't show you the time, but at least it shows you that this thing ran 300 jobs last time. It ran 200 jobs today, type of thing. And I was asking about that, and oh, here's what we do. So.
Okay.
And then plus they said at the end of the year, we're trying to figure out why you have a job, you need to pause. There's all the time I say, there's 12 people.
Yeah, no, that's, I don't know why we don't already look at the efficiency of our processes and track them. And that should, we have, I fight the cognitive complexity error in Apex all the time. So there's a tool, a library called PMD, which stands for nothing. They just used an acronym. It doesn't actually mean anything. But it is something that you either plug into your code scanner, and you can also plug it into VS Code when you're writing code. But we, in multiple organizations, we use PMD to say, okay, we want this to be really readable code. And we want our methods to have a maximum of 30 lines of code per method. So if you've got a lot of steps in your code, you have to break it up into multiple methods. This method does this step and calls the next one. This method does this and calls the next one. It forces you to make good names and break those out. But that error is called cognitive complexity. And that's a developer. A developer has to know that that's a best practice, and they have to write their code according to what the cognitive complexity rules have been set for PMD for that institution. We follow those rules as developers by rote. We just do that. Okay, I write small functions now. Why not say, when I'm writing small functions, I should log when I go from step to step? It would be, if developers write their own metrics for their success, and they make sure that they get the feedback. Hey, where do I send my success log? I know where to send my error logs. Where do I send my success logs? That should be day one at a job is, okay, what's your data factory? What's your trigger handler? How do you name flows? And where your success logs go? How do we name our process? These are 45 HR processes and 32 ordering processes and 95 whatever else processes that are all running in Salesforce. They should be grouped together, and you should be able to see how many people are using your flows, how many people are completing these processes. I don't know why nobody's thought of making that part of Agile. So not just catching the timing, everybody has done catching the timing. It's been, exit and how long does it take, but turning it into a developer practice, just like error logging, just like PMD rules, variable naming schemas, and then where's your success log? To me, that's the genius aha moment of the super simple, just made as a pattern, implemented by developers so that they get their own feedback on their stuff. Otherwise, once you promote something to production, it takes me 5 people to find out. I have to call my product owner. Product owner has to call the VP that she works for that funded our project. That VP has to call the regional manager to ask the regional manager to talk to the franchisees of the 7-Elevens, and those franchisees, regional managers goes and asks the actual employees what they think of that tool or how easy it was. As a consultant, I don't get that information. I'm not allowed to contact that. As a developer, I'm not allowed to see production. But if you set that pattern up, if we as a dev practice, as an agile practice, it says, this is where that data goes. This is how we ensure it doesn't create PII, and everybody should just use this logging.
And you called it cognitive what?
Cognitive complexity.
Complexity, okay.
Yeah, there's a bunch of fun stuff in PMD where it's trying to put names around styles of coding patterns, and they're obscure. But that one I've learned, because I hate telling people to do that. One of my last engagements, I was responsible for setting up the DevOps pattern, which included PMD rules, and all of the offshore developers wrote really long methods. They weren't insanely long, but the client set down a rule that they could only be 20 or 30 lines. Like, no, we need 300 lines per method. That's just standard. The client wants 20 or 30. Well, we have to rewrite everything that we've written so far. The client wants 20 or 30. We have to rewrite it. We know it's costing time, and just go back and forth. Hey, and I negotiate. Can we have 50? Can we have 100? Can we have 100 that is split up to 3? How about if we aim for 30, but we said that's a soft limit where we throw a warning at 30. We review anything more than 60, but we don't block them. Because if you get blocked and you have to rewrite a piece of code because it went one line too long, that sucks. But it's just a pattern. That's what, yeah, sorry, that's a PMD fun thing. Version control. Don't remember exactly where I was going to go with this. You have to be aware that you're going to do version control. You need to be able to look back to previous versions and write your flows so that they pick up where they leave off, and that you're not doing anything strangely different. This ties into scheduled paths. Fun trick, when you launch a scheduled flow, it's a path on a scheduled flow, not a scheduled flow. When you launch a flow and you say, come back in 30 days, on every case create, I'm going to launch this flow. It's going to check X, Y, Z. And then in 30 days, you want it to come back and check P, V, and Q. These 3 things. That flow runs and stays in memory in that position for the 30 days. That's a couple of development cycle sprints where you may have changed that flow, and there may be different logic in it. I still don't fully understand. If I change that flow, it's the base flow, you write a piece of flow code. If one has already been initiated and running and waiting, and I change what that flow does now, does it run the old version of the flow? Or does it pick up at that same step in the new version of the flow? And if that step has been moved or renamed, does it know how to find it? I hate scheduled paths in flows. I always I use my infinite flow, and I say, okay, everything that's of the date, the 30 days later, check it and see if that date is today. I'll set a date stamp on the referral that says this is the day you should come back and check it. And then I have a big batch process go in and check everything whose day is today. I don't leave a bunch of flows running. They could be in the millions. If you're bulk importing a bunch of records and saying, okay, here's all the new marketing leads we have, make sure you call every one of those. If you have 1 million paused flows, that's a lot of session memory. And that sits out there and is something you have to worry about when you're updating that flow. What happens to all those flows that are still paused in that previous version? Sucks. So batch jobs. And my event turnstile is a great way to do batch jobs in Salesforce in flows. And we talked about bulk. I mentioned bulkification. So bulkification, when you are inside of a flow and say, I've got a list of accounts. So I'm going to launch this screen and I'm going to say, I'm going to go through the process to review and call each of my accounts, each of the customers that I call on, each of the cases somebody's put a ticket in, each of the people who have an HR complaint. Whatever you're doing, you have a lot of things and you may want to loop over those in your flow. And so when I get a new user in my loop, I've got a list of my users and I start looping over it and I need some extra information about that user. I need to go get their contact information or how many cases they've opened. Normally, what flow developers tend to do is put another query inside of that loop. I'm going to go into that, I get all my accounts and I start looping over my accounts. And every time I need a piece of data, I query it. And when I get done with that, I save that record and then I loop and do it again. So I get and put inside of a loop. You are not supposed to do that in Apex code. You are supposed to save all of these gets and puts into memory, into one structure, bulk, and then at the end of all the loops, you insert one set of records. That sends one connection to the database. It's a lot bigger, but it's way smaller and way less resource intensive than doing 100 single elements or 200. And flows will actually break when you get to 101 queries inside of a loop. So understanding that that's a pattern, and I had to, when I came up with the event process, the event idea for infinite flows, it was because my customer said, hey, I've got this process that runs nightly for my 500 accounts. I need to have a check-in, an email sent out to every one of those accounts, to every one of those cases. Cool, I'll build a flow. I built a flow, it went into production, it failed the first night it went into production. You talk, okay, it's saying that too many errors. You said you only had 500 accounts. Oh, well, 500 mostly active and big accounts, but we actually have 1,200 in the database. Oh, well, that's too many queries, or that's too many elements from flow. Well, I could do 600 and 600, but I have to run the flow twice, and to run it twice, I have to make a copy of it. So anyway, that's kind of a reason around bulkification. You have to think in that pattern. You have to think, how many times am I going to call extra data? So in memory management, that big, keeping a map of things and looking something up and putting it someplace else. If you can't do that in flow logic, you're kind of creating a problem in advance of, if my customer gets their 401st account, and then my flow breaks, and then they have to write something completely different or completely restructure it. So you are always, when you do a trigger for Apex, you are always supposed to assume, like a record update. Hey, you got a new account, you got a new case. You're always supposed to assume when you write a trigger that you just got 800 of them at once, or 1,000 of them at once. Delete, somebody could bulk delete something and say, delete all these records. Some batch import job could import 900 records at once, and that's what the flow would run on. And so you're always supposed to assume I've got 300 inserts, so I need to run 300 processes, and at the end of that, then I insert one insert of 300 records at once. I do not insert 300 things one at a time. So that bulkification concept, if you're writing flows with that, one, it'll work and not break. And that's why flows are only an admin tool, because you can break them so easily. Numbers like 100 or 1,000 are big numbers for flows if you don't know how to use bulkification, if you don't have an event pattern in them. They just don't work. So you can only do cute screen stuff. So if you start thinking in those patterns, you're actually working in a mature language, and you're doing mature things. It'll be easier for developers to understand what you're doing. Your flows will last longer and need less refactoring, and survive. Does that make sense? The other thing for loops, I like to set a maximum. I always break out. If I ever get into a loop and it's going too long, or I always set an assumption of how many records I'm going to have. And if for some reason my loop or my flow is running, if there's 20,000 records for some reason being selected, I want to stop the flow there. Something's broken. So you can put those kind of check logs or error gates, error conditions inside of your flows. It's if you get to here and you still don't have one of these, then generate an email to the admin, because the next page isn't going to work. Write a record someplace. If it's just spinning and going, it's taking too long, the flow will time out. When the flow times out, you don't get debug of what step it failed on all the time. So if you start gating those and say the max you should ever have, and I put this in my label, that if it works and they actually get to their 600th customer, I can go set the maximum up to 600. And so the flow doesn't necessarily break, but it pauses. There's a step in between. The data has changed too much. I might need to come in and refactor this flow. You can try setting this up to 600, but if that breaks, then you can go ahead and set it back to 500, and just some people or some things might be missing. So putting kind of those catch controls in there, or you've gotten too far, or you've reached an error condition, or it's an unexpected condition, I hit a null. Those are good tests that you do a lot inside of programming that you do need to put inside of flows sometimes. Now, flows has a lot of training wheels in it that keeps you from hitting errors like you hit in code, keeps you from failing on nulls and stuff like that. But adding that, having that concept is something you could say, I built my flow just like an Apex programmer builds their code. They're similar, we can judge them by the same rules, and that means we have one review process, and I either look at code or I look at flows, but they're all following the same smart rules. And that's in a nutshell what I have for flows. Any questions on that? From anybody? Okay, I don't see that. Let me open up that. Anybody stay awake for the entire thing?
No.
Looks
Yeah.
like everybody's still here.
We had another one join us.
We built a list organization. My head is. But is Flow smart enough to just keep track of all that, or do you have to create like arrays? That, you know, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's gonna
When you look over flows, so there's a collection sort now that you can say, I got back all this data. Now I want to order it by this and this and this. So you'll know when you pass that to the loop, it's going to start at the first one and then go to the second one, and then the next one, and when it gets to the end, it's after last. So it's always a do while loop.
okay, but in the loop, let's say you're gonna write, you're gonna say SKU X through or A through C. SKU A, you're gonna do whatever you're gonna do, and then you're gonna write out to Salesforce SKU A with whatever information. Multiplication says you're gonna create basically an array of A through Z with those things, and then when you get out of the loop, you go down and say, I need this whole package of Salesforce. Using myself out of the thing because I tried this something similar, and it just put the same thing in it over and over and over. Because
So-
I had to go and make it. I type thing is you have to do the same thing like you would in normal code, or is it smart enough to know that you're going to be it's not just going to look like the same list. See what I'm saying?
Yep, no, and this is a developer pattern problem. It's a variable scoping. So when you're inside of a for loop, which is a standard code for loop, if you initialize a variable inside of the for loop, if you say var placeholder is equal to whatever this element in the loop is, it will have that variable through that iteration of the loop. When you start back over, it's going to reinitialize that variable and blank it out or put something new in it. If you store something in that variable, it dies at the end of the loop. So if you want that to still persist, you have to create the variable outside of the for loop, and then you're setting to an outer variable while you're inside of it. What I do inside of loops, or what you do inside of loops, is I create a loop variable. So when I'm looking at one case for an account, if I'm looking at a lot of cases and I want to create that collection that I'm eventually going to insert, I use a temporary collection variable, a record var, one record, and then I set all the values for that one record. And then the next set step is take that record and put it into a collection. And then the next time the loop comes, that same record, that same variable gets the new data put into it, and then it's put into the collection right after the other one. Well, the variable scope is always global. So if you're in a loop, you're always writing to the global version of the variable.
Right, but
it won't be the same thing. It'll be whatever the value is when you set it.
like in Oracle, you would have to say bracket 0, bracket 1, bracket 2, bracket 3.
Oh, yes, an auto index, where you just say you add the record, the single record to a collection, and you can only go to the bottom. So you couldn't put it at 0, you couldn't put it at 1.5, you know, you can't put indexes anymore. You couldn't reorder them and say, hey, place this 3 and push them all down. There's no push, pop, stack, or array. it always will just go into the bottom. And then you have another function called collection sort that you say, okay, now reorder them and then loop through them this way. And if you get the first time you get to something that's greater than 300 and color equals blue, then exit, because you want to process everything until you start getting the blue car. Random example. But yeah, it's always pushing onto the stack, and then it's reading from 0 to length -1, which is
So
what
it takes the step.
Yeah. it just, yeah, you're always thinking and only iterating through the loops. It keeps you from doing weird index math and I -1 and I -3. What they don't have is a great break element, and that's why I usually do a decision is loop this. Is hair color equal to blue? Something's gone wrong, exit the loop and do something else. But yeah, so I'm sorry, long way to answer that question.
Yeah, because I just did that, I guess we can kind of, I was expecting 20 things. It just kept going, right? The next thing off the one, because I didn't step it down. to the next
Yeah.
variable place. I didn't know if it said-
Yes, it will automatically, you can't overwrite a variable in a collection with an add. When you're inside of loops, it creates a temporary, so if I'm looping over a set of accounts or cases, it knows, it says, okay, here's case 0. And the loop has a context, an index of current item from loop get all cases. And so that current item variable always has exactly what you're working on.
Limit on the number of records versus the way we have governor limits, so is there any limit on the number of records, upload updates?
50,000 is, yeah, I think is the maximum for any get or update. So the maximum number of records from a query to get records in is 50,000. I believe that's the same for write.
Is that for the flow?
Per run of the flow.
If it's irrelevant, if it's in a batch or in a full
If
collection?
LWC is calling the same flow over and over again, it's however many times that flow is initiated. That's my event flow is a recursive flow. The flow runs once, it does as many queries as it thinks as I tell it to do before we break, saves its state, finishes that group of records, and creates an event, which is the same type of event that started the flow in the first place, and then it can churn through that many more records. Apex has memory limits and they have CPU time limits, but they don't have they don't have the same loop or record. They don't have limits on their loops. Salesforce took away the limits on the loops now, the iterations that can happen inside of the flow. But with the event pattern, I just recurse. If it's taking too long or if I've got too many steps, I just, okay, let that one finish, write the record, come back and start over. Don't try and you don't have to do it in one step. The only thing you have to worry about when you're doing really dealing with really big data sets is data segmentation and indexes. So if I've got 3 million cases and I'm trying to loop over all 3 million of them, but I only want to do it 20,000 at a time or 100 at a time, Salesforce will give up if it says, and my analogy that I'm getting to use this, Hawaii. Hawaii's in the middle of the ocean. If you go to a beach and say, I'm just going to swim to Hawaii, most people are going to say, I can't see Hawaii. I don't know how far it is. I don't know if it's left or right. If I miss it by this much, I'll drown or I'll get eaten by sharks. The query, if it doesn't know enough about that big pool of data, that big ocean of data, the query just won't run. It'll say limit exceeded, non-selectable query. It doesn't have, if you put indexes, if you say, okay, we're going to break up the data. So whenever you look at the ocean, we're just going to look at this lane in the ocean. And if you know you've got that path and that's directly where Hawaii is, then you just have to consider if I can swim long enough. If you create another index, you can get further in there. So the more indexes, and that's just making, indexes are making, from Oracle, you probably know it. Indexes are telling the database in advance sort your data and count, be ready for queries that ask about hair color and ask about number of seats and ask about, if you've got 10 million things and they're indexed into parts that you can select, and you've told the database ahead of time, hey, I'm probably going to select by hair color. If there's a less than 50,000 people with blue hair color, if you've indexed it out of a pool of 1 million, 10 million, you'll get that record set back. If you haven't indexed it, the query is going, I'm not ready to go look at the entire database for what, I'm not going to look at 20 million records and just pull back the ones that are blue. An index kind of pre-computes and pre-sorts that data and says, here's all the blue records, here's how many there are. Here's a list grouped already by that, and that makes it easy for the database. It doesn't have to scan the entire database to get it. So you build that scaffolding, that a dock, a longer dock out into a buoy out into the ocean that you know where you can get to. And so the database has to have, if you're going to try and get to Hawaii, you've got to plan the database to have those buoys and have those steps and have that dock in place for you to get out there and for it to be safe, as opposed to, yeah, I'm not going to try and swim to Hawaii. It's too far, I've got no signposts, and I'll die. So that's how indexes kind of help with that. And so if you can get indexes in there, you can work with really large record sets, and the flow will return that, but you've got to make sure, hey, if I can only swim 2 miles, I need to have a buoy every 2 miles. So if I've got 50,000 records and I need to have indexes that will bring back just 50,000 records. I need to have, if there's 100,000 blue-haired people, I've got to say, I need blue-haired people that were born in May. And that will should give me 1/12 of the blue-haired people. And then maybe in another flow, I run blue-haired people born in July. And I have to loop over it 12 times. But if I can segment that data down into less than 50,000 bytes or 50,000 records, then Flow can process it. But that's kind of the data plan. You have to kind of plan up into the data model when you're trying to process it. So it's important, that's when you're building a flow, how many records are in this table? You want me to build it on cases? How many records are in there? What fields in case are indexed? Do I have buoys that if I'm querying a lot of franchise locations, if I'm querying a lot of customers, show me all the customers that have blue hair color? No, you have to have already planned for that. If you know the numbers, you know the limits of flow, and then you build your flows accordingly. Or what I recently had to do, hey, I need 4 more fields indexed because it's a 10 million record object. There's 10 million customers. That's too many for me to query. It works just fine one at a time. I can open a customer, I can search for a customer. When I'm doing a flow trying to look for all of the customers, I have to have those buoys set up. And I have to have a lot of them to get a group of 10 million into less than 50,000, and then I can work with it. And if I need to work with more than 50,000, that's kind of a memory and flow limit. If I'm working it at the same time, then if I can't slice it into recursion with the event pattern, then I just can't do it, and I have to probably look at Apex. Apex has higher limits on some of those things. I'm going to test you on your job here. I saw a new John Martinez join. Did you give him permission to speak?
I did.
Outstanding. Welcome, John. Oh, thank you. And he's even in the panelists. Anybody have any questions? I know we have a small audience, but thanks. You're able to hear all of John's questions, right, Lawrence?
Yes, we have a couple in there that are looking for examples for the flow for bulkification was one. Then the external tools that you referenced for changeable parameters were the 2 questions in the chat.
Okay. So changeable parameters, labels, I can go ahead and log in. So if I wanted to set a maximum number of elements in a flow, let me pop open. Really? What's this one? Nope, resourceful raccoon, I guessed wrong. I should save that, but. Oh, okay, so. So this is where you would go create a variable that an admin can come in here. So this is my kill code variable. So if I'm worried that my recursive events are running too long, I set the kill code to true or to false. And the flow, every time it runs, it checks to see if the value of the label is false, and it goes ahead and runs. If it's true, it stops and it doesn't process again, and that stops a runaway, my runaway events. So all I had to do is just now when I go into my flows, so we just called this my new var. This is the flow I made just for drawing some diagrams, made it last night. But I want to go in here and look at it. Scroll down here to the bottom. So this is a good thing to go look and see what's in here, but there's the label. And here's my new var. So whatever I've set that to, that'll pull back 76. If that's important, then now your flow uses that. So you've just adjusted how your code runs on the fly by just changing this variable. So it'll say 76 now. If tomorrow when the flow runs, I've changed the label, it'll process using whatever the current version of the label is whenever the flow runs. CMDT, the custom metadata tables are, instead of a single value like a label is, you can set up tables of data. You can say, make a new table of all the users who are allowed to see blue hair color. Everybody else is that. And you query the custom metadata table just like you query an object. It follows a little bit different rules. It's a little bit more performant. It's more in memory. But again, sometimes different groups can say, yeah, go edit custom metadata. That's not the same thing as changing the flow. It's changing data. And if the data is telling the flow how to run, same thing as an object.
Hey, John, does that explain, answer your question? John was asking why we were doing it outside of the flow. And I think you just described that well, saying that way you can make a data change without updating the flow.
Right. You can change the label. You can just as easily make it an object. And you can give a business user, the ability to change the number of times your flow executes. If you give them that number in a user setting object, they can go set that. And the first thing you do is go query to find out that number, what the limit is. And then you use that inside of your flow. Wow, I've talked way too long. This was not supposed to go that long. It was supposed to be more of a straight thing. I'm so sorry. Hopefully I got the questions.
That was it. I think it's impressive. John's watching this from his soccer practice.
Yeah, it got me out of changing the litter box. So anyway, so we wanted to talk. I'll keep you guys another 25 minutes. Sorry, the disruption of moving rooms threw me off a little bit. I was hoping to get through that a little faster. What do you want to talk about? What would you like to do? What can we do together? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for joining online. I'm gonna stop the recording and we're just gonna chat on together with the student group here. So welcome to join. Students interested in what's going on at UTD.
Did you mention the DFW Flow Wizards as a resource?
The DFW Flow Wizards resource.
They have a Slack that's really, right now it's just me and Dana and Marshall in there.
Okay.
They're really good about answering all my questions.
Ohana Slack has its own flow channel, so I appreciate Nana and Marshall's Slack, but there is a bigger Slack out there that has a ton of people in it already. So it's one of my mentors, Megan, who passed away a couple months ago, started Ohana Slack, and there's 6,000 or 7,000 users in there now. I think they may pass their 10,000th user. Actually been acknowledged by Slack, the company, and it was before the acquisition. So there's a huge audience out there. So Nana and Marshall are great, and it's, but I would also say there's the global Slack community that I was involved in helping build up. So
Okay, two
yeah,
things.
Dallas Flow Wizards, local group that loves to get together and do flows and work on stuff like that too.
Paul, we're still recording and Harika has a hand up.